This is Democracy Watch. All right, Mark, we are sitting here. I think you and I are probably in the same position that everybody else is, reeling from this Supreme Court decision, basically effectively granting Donald Trump immunity, if not also the delay that he was seeking in this trial. Right off the top here, what's the fix? Could Congress pass a law stating that a president doesn't have immunity? And if so, would that law supersede this Supreme Court ruling? Or could the justices have the opportunity to discard it?
I don't think that there's an easy fix to this. I mean, look, the Supreme Court here knew exactly what it was doing. You know, people who are commenting and saying, oh, the Supreme Court is naive about the realities of Donald Trump. No. The Supreme Court's not naive about the realities of Donald Trump. The Supreme Court knew exactly what they were doing, both with respect to impacting the past cases, the cases that are pending, but also what it means if Donald Trump wins again, right? Donald Trump is saying he will be a dictator for a day. Donald Trump is saying that he will exact retribution. Donald Trump is working with Project 2025 and others to allow him to take over the entire executive branch to mete out retribution through frivolous criminal prosecutions and investigations. So do I think that this could be fixed by Congress passing a law? No. Why? Because the Supreme Court is in on it. You know, the Supreme Court did this because this was the result they wanted. And it's about time that we look in the mirror and rather than seeing a bunch of Harvard and Yale educated people who drink wine at cocktail parties and eat crudité and send their kids to the same prep schools that liberals do and think that they have the same value system, to realize they don't have the same value system. This is what they intended to do. And I am at a loss for words as to how this gets fixed, because I don't think if Congress passed a law saying, look, the made up immunity that the Supreme Court created, it goes away. I think the Supreme Court would say, no, you can't do that. We think that this is a matter of constitutional law and that trumps your statute.
And is that how it works? Like, would the Supreme Court have the ability to interpret a law that Congress passed that would expressly forbid a president from having presidential immunity? Could the Supreme Court then overturn a law that Congress passes?
Sure. I mean, the Supreme Court does strike down laws if they're unconstitutional. And they would say that this is a matter of constitutional law. And, that's just the way it is.
Right.
And, you get it, your incredulousness gets at kind of the real point here, which is you are left saying, but wouldn't the Supreme Court in that circumstance, realize the enormity of what they would be doing there? Right? They would be overturning the will of the Congress to limit the ability of a president to, among other things, assassinate their political opponents and escape criminal liability. But if one thing we learned from Dobbs and all of the cases afterwards, that is not for the conservatives, that is a feature, not a flaw.
Right. And I think they do these things knowing that, for all those people, and this is going to lead into my next question about what Biden can do, but for all these people who say, well, now Biden has carte blanche to do X, Y, and Z, they understand the asymmetry between the two parties. They understand that even though a president could do something right now by virtue of this decision that a Democratic president just wouldn't. A Democratic president just wouldn't do the same things that someone like Donald Trump would avail himself of. And so I think that's their safety valve in all of this.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote a piece for Democracy Docket a few weeks back about election denialism called The Asymmetry of Election Denialism, right? Which is exactly this, is that, Democrats are not going to engage in mass voter suppression.
Right.
We are not going to adopt an election denier movement. And that gives the other side a lot of flexibility. Well, boy, is that showing itself out here, right? Because like you said, Joe Biden is not going to assassinate his political opponents.
Right.
Joe Biden is not going to commit crimes in office, and no Democratic president, as you point out, would do that. And I'm not even sure every Republican president would do it, but sitting on their doorstep are both criminal cases where a Republican president did it, and that same person, the Republican nominee, running neck and neck in the polls,
right,
to potentially do it again next year.
Right. To that point then, what could Biden do as the result of this ruling, and what should Biden do as the result of this ruling?
Look, I think that all of the delay and hand-wringing that we have seen, and I'm not saying just from President Biden, but I think he's been, because he's an institutionalist, I think he has been slow on this, and the White House has. But all of the hand-wringing about judicial reform just has to end.
Right.
I mean, if you didn't have the wake-up call that the Supreme Court needs to be reformed in its ethics, in the way in which they choose cases, and the way in which the opinions are handed down, the way in which they have aggregated their own power. I mean, it's not just this case. Remember, a few days ago we were talking about another case where they gave a pass to January 6th insurrectionists.
Right. Fisher,
and a few months ago we were talking about a case in which they told Colorado they couldn't kick Trump off the ballot under the 14th Amendment as an insurrectionist. This is a pattern. This is not a one-off case. And so we need to have a serious conversation as a country. Congress needs to have a serious conversation. The White House needs to have a serious conversation. And we need to have a campaign that talks about not just democracy being on the ballot, but also court reform being on the ballot.
Well, you've been beating this drum to your credit and to the credit of Democracy Docket, and I think that's exactly the kind of outlets, the kind of people that need to be lifted up. So for those watching right now, if you are not yet subscribed to Democracy Docket, it's the free news outlet Marc founded to focus on everything voting and elections. Please make sure to sign up, because this is the exact kind of thing that we should be lifting up in light of what we just saw in the court. You had just mentioned Section 3 of the 14th Amendment case. Can you help me reconcile here how the Supreme Court could create this idea of presidential immunity for committing criminal activity totally out of whole cloth? This is something that is not in the Constitution. And in fact, the immunity for civil prosecution is, which would by negative inference suggest that actually the Constitution prohibits immunity for criminal prosecution. And yet disregarded the plain text of the Constitution as it relates to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which very clearly states that an official is disqualified from running for office again if they engage in insurrection. Can you help me explain the dichotomy between these two things?
Yeah, originalism and textualism has been replaced by vibism. Right? This is just like conservative vibes. They're just like vibing that Donald Trump shouldn't be kicked off the ballot, and they're vibing that Donald Trump should have immunity. But the fact is, they are both similar cases in that in one instance, textualism and originalism would have kicked Donald Trump off the ballot, and in another case, it would not have given immunity to presidents. Right. As you point out, there is in the U.S. Constitution a clear provision of immunity to members of the legislative branch. It's called speech and debate immunity. There is not immunity anywhere to be found in the Constitution for the President of the United States. And they created an immunity that is not just what Donald Trump wanted, but Donald Trump wanted and then some. They gave him more in some senses that they wanted, and they have put in serious jeopardy not just the case in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, the Georgia case about January 6th. Lord knows in Florida, he doesn't even need immunity. There he's just got...
To the point of Florida, Clarence Thomas, apropos of nothing, slipped in this little clause that I'm going to read to you right now. He said, in this case, the Attorney General purported to appoint a private citizen as special counsel to prosecute a former president on behalf of the United States, but I am not sure that any office for the special counsel has been established by law as the Constitution requires. So that's just a little nugget for Judge Cannon, who is right now litigating and adjudicating this issue of whether or not a special counsel can even prosecute this case, as she's deciding whether or not to dismiss it. And Clarence Thomas offered a little nugget to say, hey, Judge Cannon, if you dismiss this and it makes its way up to the Supreme Court, you've got at least one vote in your corner.
Oh, at least. I mean, come on. He's got more than one. He's got more than one vote in his corner. I think we all know. But absolutely. And so, this will have a cascading effect regarding a number of the Donald Trump cases. And when you take it in conjunction with the Fisher case, the January 6th insurrection case, people say, well, this is only immunity for Donald Trump, but not the people who he'd ordered to do it. Of course, he has the pardon power, and he has been clear that he will use the pardon power to achieve a political end, and he can't be prosecuted for that, we now know.
Right.
And so what is being created is, through all of these decisions, is a culture that the MAGA movement is going to see and is going to experience, that they can be lawless, they can be brazen, and they will get away with it. And, 4 months from the next election and 4.5 months from the next set of litigation that Donald Trump will bring to try to overturn the election, and 5 or 6 months away from the next January 6th, we should all be worried about that.
I can feel the blood pressures rising among all of our viewers on the other side of these screens. So I have to ask this question right now, given the sheer amount of despair that I'm sure people are feeling right now, that I'm sure you and I are feeling right now. What's your message to people today? What's the message you want to send them off with? What could we do moving forward?
Look, don't despair. I mean, this is the time to fight back. I mean, despair doesn't get you anywhere. Despair doesn't help save democracy, right? We all need to be more determined than ever to protect democracy. And that starts with making sure you are registered to vote, your friends and family are registered to vote, that you haven't been kicked off the ballot by the right-wing vote suppressors. And then make sure you vote, and you vote for Democrats up and down the ballot from top to absolute bottom. Make sure you know the issues. If there is a ballot initiative in your state, make sure you know about them. If you're in a state with a pro-choice ballot initiative, make sure you vote for that. And everyone needs to speak out. This is not the time to bury your head in the sand. This is the time to speak out loudly in your town square. Take to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Go to your friends, your family. Stand on the street corner if you have to, and tell them that we need to fight for our democracy.
Perfectly put. We'll leave it there. For those watching right now, again, to support the invaluable work that Marc and his team are doing. And again, this is in ground zero for where a lot of these fights are fought, which is in the courts. If you want to support Marc and his team, please make sure to sign up for Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.